Welcome to Teach with Mr. Hawkins, Episode 9. Today we're looking at a fairy tale. This is Rumpelstiltskin, a version done by Paul O. Zelinsky. Paul Zelinsky does a lot of versions of fairy tales. He's kind of known or famous for that. He takes source material like the Brothers Grimm stuff, and he tends to put it together and craft one version of the story that is true to the old versions but flows together. So he might use parts of one edition and another edition. So he's trying to get a representative version of the story that kind of makes sense and you can read as a modern reader and understand. And his illustrations are lights out, and he won an award for this particular book. Learning fairy tales is foundational to English literature, and a lot of world cultures have their own versions of fairy tales as well, and comparing them is a useful activity as well. When you're using any fairy tale, especially as a parent at home or a teacher or student teacher, you want to preview it ahead of time. You want to make sure you're comfortable with the content. You might have different levels of violence that you may or may not like, and archaic language or storytelling bits that don't make sense to your context. So it's always good to pre-read them and make sure it's going to do what you want to do and all the pages are appropriate for your audience, your role. So this story is Rumpelstiltskin, and that might be familiar to your audience or your class. And what I often do is I ask the students, do any of you think you know what this story is, and get a show of hands. And it helps, because if no one puts their hand up, okay, you're going fresh. If everybody puts their hand up, which they might do with a story like Rapunzel, the trick is they might not actually know the story of Rapunzel. They might know a movie that's adapted from it, like Tangled, which is actually quite different, only has a couple of the original details in it. But something I usually have the students do is, if you know this story, say your family read this story to you at home, I want you to keep it secret. Don't give away any of the parts to anybody else. Let them be surprised, and you can just nod that you knew that part or that surprise. Otherwise, sometimes you'll have a student that's calling out all the details a page ahead of time, and it can ruin a story for everybody else if you don't have that culture of not doing that. This version of this story, a person could stop at just about any page and ask a question. You could, especially about what the characters are doing or acting. What did you think about what that character did? It lends itself to little pauses and the students turning to each other and talking. So I'm not going to list a bunch of those or model that. We've talked about that in previous videos. Follow up to this book. This story is from oral tradition. It was collected from the Brothers Grimm sources. It talks about that in the back. Why do you think parents told this story to children? Because the original fairy tales had that purpose. They were gathered for a reason. Why might Rumpelstiltskin want the royal baby? What story details support your inferences? I've done that question with older students, and sometimes they'll give you a really creative answer, but they don't support it with anything. So then it gives you that chance to provide feedback of, go back and are you using the detail from your story, or how can you prove or back up what you're saying? What if the mother never learned his name? Write a new ending for the story. That can be a good tactic or a good question. Sometimes students enjoy doing that, is giving their own take or spin on something if you interrupt it. Sometimes you'll do that without reading them the ending and see how they did. How many villains are there in this story? Explain who and how they are villains. This version of Rumpelstiltskin, I would argue there's at least 2 villains, depending on your point of view. Thanks for watching, Teach with Mr. Hawkins. Have a good day.